My guest today is Blaize Stewart. Blaize, how are you, sir?
Doing fantastic. How are you, sir?
I'm doing excellent as well. What do you do for a living?
Oh, what do I do for a living? I'm a consultant. I work in the Azure space quite a bit, Microsoft Azure, as well as like the kind of tangential technologies. So all things Azure infrastructure, apps on Azure, AI, data, and then of course all the tooling that comes along with that. So if it's like Azure DevOps or GitHub or anything of that gets apps onto Azure, that's something that I do as well. But my most recent focuses have been on trying to understand AI and how that works with like how you can integrate it into applications, all the tools and technologies in the Azure ecosystem that kind of support that, and all the patterns and principles that you can apply to any number of different problems for creating AI powered applications. And so that's the most recent thing I've been kind of messing with, and that's been a lot of fun to learn and to just kind of explore as a personal thing as well as use it customer work.
Yeah. You get your hands on a lot of different things. When you talk about
Absolutely.
AI, we were talking about this the other day, and you mentioned RAG is something you're working with quite a bit.
Right.
Can you give us a definition? What is it? What do we mean when we say RAG?
RAG, yeah, it's such a bad acronym, but a RAG app, RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation, and it's a term I can't remember who coined it, but I think it was at Facebook. The idea with this though is to augment what we do with typically with LLMs. So most people are by now
LLMs are
large language models. So anytime you're interacting with like something like ChatGPT, right, or Copilot, or anything that's kind of got that AI backed interactive experience, that most people by now, if you're working in IT, have at least been exposed to at some level. It's, I guess, a fairly common thing. But RAG apps are any kind of application that will take additional data. It will go out to a database or search, do a kind of some kind of search or whatever, and it will retrieve something and then pull that retrieved data and analyze it using a large language model. And as part of that large language model, you're trying to extract information from it, summarize that information, answer questions, do some kind of analysis that a large language model is capable of doing. So that retrieval augmentation is just all about going out, grabbing data, pulling it back in, and then allowing AI to create some kind of output based on that additional data that's not embedded in the model that you're using. So that's a mouthful, but it's a very popular architecture, and there's a lot of permutations of it for sure in the current space.
Yeah, so that's a general definition, but I think it'd be more clear if you specify some use cases. How do people actually use this RAG pattern?
So one of the canonical patterns is talking about how you can use it to explore unstructured data. So this is a very common way that people are kind of exposed to it, but it's not exclusive to this. So the typical scenario goes something like this, where you have a large document repository. It could be Word documents, PDFs, it could be a wiki, anything like that. You just have a lot of like text data. And to search that text data, you could do something like a Google search, which is kind of keyword based, and it'll match that keywords against what's in the data, and you will get some relevant results back using that. However, what you can do with something like a RAG app is by turning AI onto that. AI not only understands the keywords, but also the ideas that are kind of associated with that. So whenever you're searching something like these like unstructured data, it's able to analyze the text in that data corpus, that typically a body of documents, and find things that are related to what you're looking for that don't necessarily match the keywords, but at least are closely related to it in terms of what ideas you're trying to express and look for. So you just say, find me anything that's dealing with the the city of Atlanta. Well, if you just did keyword matching, you're gonna get things that mention Atlanta, but you could be getting a lot of things that are focused in that geographic region. Say maybe you're getting information about maybe Marietta, although it doesn't explicitly represent mention Atlanta, or something about tourist attraction there, like the Georgia Aquarium, or maybe it's some history. I don't know. There's a lot of things that you could, pull back that are related ideas that don't explicitly mention that idea. And so that's the real power of these things. It's a research accelerator and gives you relevant information that's very pertinent to what you're looking for without having to comb through documents upon documents based off just strictly on keyword searches and things like that.
Okay, so it understands the context of what you're looking for,
Yeah.
as well as just the words that you're looking for. And what about the data itself? What are we? Uh, if I just go to Google, I can search for essentially the entire public internet. But I think
Yeah.
with RAG, we can extend that even further.
Yeah, RAG is it's you can use RAG on the public internet with a tool like ChatGPT, right? So ChatGPT has access to Bing behind it, and then Bing then will search for documents in its database, and then the LLM and the ChatGPT engine will analyze that data and give you results from it. That's one way of doing that. But if you wanted to use RAG internally in like an internal like context, that's one area where it's found a lot of uses, especially in like businesses that have like historical data that they're really wanting to look at. They have policy manuals where they're just a ton of policy that they kind of have to follow, but they don't necessarily have it all memorized, so they can quickly find uh, data in that policy set that will be relevant to what they're looking for. Other things would be like regulations and law and medical fields, all these different kinds of document repositories and research that exists out there. Searching that becomes a lot easier with RAG app. Even if you're not searching the public internet, you can use this internally in your own data and use it to find relevant information in your business context as well. So that's one way that a lot of businesses are using it currently, especially like law, medical, a lot of like policy driven organizations like insurance and banking and a lot of FinOps or fintech type stuff. So anything that's under heavy regulation, there's just a ton of applications that people are using it for there.
Are these things pretty straightforward to develop, or are there specific challenges that you have to overcome?
Well, there's a quite a bit of challenge whenever you get beyond the kind of the initial like out of the box experience. Now you can get a RAG app fairly quickly if you go to like something like Azure and you go into Azure's AI Studio or something like that. You can quickly add to that a document repository. Typically on Azure, you can ingest the data. It provides all the tools for that, and it will index them. It uses Azure cognitive search behind the scenes. It will index all that data for you, and then you can turn on the LLM and have it even generate the UI for you, so where you have this interactive like chat like experience against your documents. All of that works out of the box without a lot of fuss. It's when you need to get down into the weeds and start to talk about some more uh, fine tuning on that can get a little bit more complex. And that's when you have to kind of peel back the covers on the underlying technologies and understand kind of end to end what's going on. And so there's a lot of nuance that you're kind of taking for granted if you're just using the out of box experience, which works for a lot of people.
Mhm.
However, it's when you have to get into that more fine tuned experience where you have to deal with context that's not necessarily like single documents that are kind of self-contained. Like you're trying to search entire corpuses of documents where the entire document is connected. And so you want to be able to understand broadly what the entire document has, but you also want to understand the details in a specific section as well. Or you need this to work in a specific scenario that like an offline context. I need to have like a local repository of data that enables a field engineer to quickly search all this stuff when they're off in the bush somewhere doing some kind of technical implementation, and they need a local laptop that can do this for them, and they don't have an internet connection or something like that. So there's edge cases where that might be relevant. So there's engineering challenges that have to be accounted for when you're building these things and you don't have access to something like Azure's AI Studio.
Mhm.
um,
Well, how do you overcome these? Like, for example, the offline scenario, that sounds really difficult. You're trying to search something that is either out on the public web or it's internal to your organization. If you're not connected to either of those, how do you overcome that?
Well, that's where you get into the specific technologies. But generally speaking, you have to figure out a way to localize it. Like one, cull the data to where it's relevant data to what you're building the app for. So you have to reduce the context quite a bit. Uh, Second, you have to select models that can work on something like a laptop.
Hmm.
And there are models that allow you to do that. So you have to like figure out how to localize those models, and like a typical workstation would be capable of running them.
This would be
Or if you,
small language models instead of large language
well,
models.
yeah, they could be classified as small language models, but even a large language model can do that. There are large language models that can run on a laptop. You don't
Hmm.
have to have access to OpenAI to do that, and so you have to figure out which documents that you're going to do. You have to figure out how you're going to build a database that you can host locally to run all that. That's typically a vector database of sort, and then have the embedding model, which that's not hard, but figuring out a good large language model that you can use is certainly one of those challenges. And there's a lot of large language models that can run on a laptop or a workstation without an internet connection. It's just
Hmm.
finding the right one that's going to work for the scenario that you're trying to build for, and then implementing that model, and then building the software to interact with all that technology. That's a challenge, and there are certainly organizations that are kind of attacking that. And trying to figure that out. And but it's not impossible to overcome. So
You mentioned something called an embedding model. What is that?
an embedding model is just a model that's used for taking data and creating what we call embeddings. An embedding is essentially a representation of your data based on how a model interprets it. So it can be any data. It doesn't have to be text data, but in most cases for like RAG apps, it's text data. And that's where the model will take your text and then convert it into something that the model is using to represent the ideas and context of your data. And that embedding is something you can do many things with. The two main things that you do with it are either store it in a vector database, or you use it to search a vector database. So if I want to store data, I have to first create an embedding from that data, and then I take that embedding and store it in a vector database. Or I create, if I want to search that vector database, I have to have a prompt, right? That's something that I type in and then augment, and then I send that to the embedding model. It creates an embedding, and then it uses that embedding to search the other embeddings that are searched in a vector database. And once it returns those results, then you can then interpret those results using a large language model, usually by grabbing the original text data that you were creating the embedding from, and then using that to create output from the LLM, which is a separate model from the embedding model. But
Hmm.
usually they're related to one another in
I
some
see.
way.
All right. And then you did mention one tool, Azure AI Studio. Is that the tool you typically use for building this? Are there other ones?
Uh, it's a tool. It's Azure AI Studio is a tool for doing all. It's a Swiss Army knife like tool for doing all kinds of things with AI, training models, implementing models, and so on. It is a tool that I've used before. What I like about the tool is it gives you the ability to quickly spin up web endpoints for a lot of the common models that are on something like OpenAI, but also use open source models that you might find on a site like Hugging Face. Both of these are available to Azure OpenAI Studio. And it also has some tools for building RAG apps. So um, it's got tools for not only connecting the models, but you can also do some stuff with a tool called PromptFlow, which is kind of a WYSIWYG editor for building workflows that enables you to connect these things together and build apps without having to write a whole lot of code or no code in some cases. So it's a lot like something like Power Apps might do, or Logic Apps in the Azure space, but it gives you the ability just to drag and drop and connect things together and have inputs and outputs and create different kinds of AI workflows, and one of those is RAG apps. So you can definitely use it for that. So AI Studio is definitely a great tool for getting started and even more advanced scenarios in this space. And then if AI Studio doesn't do it for you, you can also kind of do it in code, and there's a lot of tools for that as well. There's some languages and frameworks that you could definitely choose for building these kinds of applications. And a few that I would mention there is Python, of course, is typically the language of choice for all things AI. But within that ecosystem, there's a framework called LangChain, and it's a tool that allows you to build Python-based applications using some abstractions around a lot of the common things that you would use in AI. So if you wanted to use OpenAI on Azure, it provides an abstraction for that. So you can call out to OpenAI in Azure and use those large language models or use the embedding models there. Or you can use it for locally hosted options as well. So if you want to use a local vector database, for instance, you could use something like Milvus or another similar database like Quadrant, or you could even use something like Postgres with Cosmos DB on Azure, and it provides you the abstractions around that to invoke those databases and call out to those databases as well. And then it gives you, by providing those abstractions, you can easily connect them all together to create AI-powered applications, including RAG apps. So it's a very powerful framework. And then there's another one in the .NET space called Semantic Kernel, does very similar things for building AI-enabled apps in the .NET space as well.
This is a lot of information.
Sorry.
I think there's I think there's a lot of people that are just getting started in this. Where would you point them to learn more?
I would truthfully, one of the best resources that I have found is, and I just hate to say it, but it's the Azure Docs. And the reason I say that is the Azure Docs provide a lot of rich examples for using LangChain and using Semantic Kernel and using OpenAI Studio, and that's where I started. When I started wanting to learn this, I started there just using a lot of the demos that were available in the open source repositories that they had available, and just walking through those tutorials to kind of see how it all works together. And those guides will give you exposure to a lot of these things I've mentioned already as well. And also I've also, and this shameless plug, but I've built a lot of like YouTube videos on this. So if you want to check out my YouTube channel, where I've just kind of put together a lot of scenarios that allow you to do things with these kind of things. And I'm not saying mine's the best content out there, but it's been an interest of mine for probably the last for the last year or so. And I built a lot of content around AI and what have you. So I need to find my YouTube channel here.
I'm looking for it right now. I found some other conference talks you've done first, though.
Yeah, I've done a lot of conference talks, and some of them have been on this right here. I'll drop it in the chat here so you can.
Thanks. I'll add to the show notes.
Link there. There's my YouTube channel. It's at Blaize Tech, and you can find there. I've done a lot of like YouTube videos on like using AI and using AI in different contexts, like in the browser, how to use it for like image searches and different AI contexts. And I've done some like, there's a video out here specifically around this idea of using RAG apps on Azure and using and then kind of an end-to-end demo with like RAG apps using Postgres SQL with Cosmos DB and OpenAI and stuff, what have you. So it's just a lot of videos on that kind of content. A lot of it's just kind of introductory type stuff, and some of it's kind of just fun. Like here's an interesting use case of AI, but don't do it. Because it's just that kind of.
Teaching us things we shouldn't do. That sounds dangerous.
Yeah, I do things kind of like that just because I'm curious, and I was like, I like to experiment and do some things that are sometimes just absurd, not because they have any practical value, but just can this be done? because sometimes even the kind of absurdity over time becomes a reality. Because like one of my videos, I built a rag app in the browser, like
I see it.
completely
That's
in the
most recent one.
browser, and I don't think that would be a good idea, but give it a few years, and then we will probably be able to do that in like reality in a practical way. Because currently, it's just not a great idea. So,
I am looking at your YouTube channel now, and I'm impressed by the artwork. It looks like a lot of it was generated using AI.
oh, absolutely, because I'm a big fan of like using that because I am not a graphic designer, and so because of that, I'll go out to Dali and use it to generate a, s- a thumbnail for YouTube that's kind of helps embody the essence of whatever I'm making a YouTube video about. So that way I
I,
have something that's useful and maybe eye catching. I don't know.
I do the
Um,
same thing with my slide decks for presentations.
oh, absolutely. I use a slide deck. I use it in slide decks all the time. And in fact, I've used it for like book cover design as well. I write books, and so
Tell
um,
me about your books.
oh, yeah, I'm a fiction writer, so I write novels,
Ah,
and they're on Amazon. But the cover art for those, I don't have a budget for that, and so because I don't write for money, I
so
just
so Dali creates your covers.
well, yeah, with some Photoshop help, but yeah, and then Photoshop has a lot of the Gen AI capabilities built in
Oh
as
yeah.
well. So between the two of them, I have um, used quite a bit of AI to generate covers for books and other things like presentations, and of course, YouTube thumbnails and lots of other things like that. So it's always fun. So here's my um, and I also have a book that I published on O'Reilly, but I didn't use AI for that because they have an in-house department for
That's the
doing all
ones
the
with animals on the cover.
yeah, the animals on the cover. Yeah, these are let's see.
Well, Blaze, this is an interesting topic, and I've learned a lot today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, and I will look forward to seeing everybody else out there. Been fun talking about rag apps and all of this different kinds of technology, and it's always great to meet friends online and in person at conferences. That's where I met David, and hopefully you've learned something today and you can share this on your journey and as you learn more about AI and moving forward in this space.